sometimes authority figures that, you know, are supposed to look out for you sometimes don't, that carries with me today in how I question things, in the types of shows that I do and how so my mom passed away from what they thought was cholangiocarcinoma, bile duct cancer, 4 years ago tonight. And ever since I started doing my show as a vegan channel, I have wanted to talk about this experience, but it's just every time you go and film it, it's not really necessarily a fun topic to be talking about. But I think enough time has passed, and I want to do this video. I think for those of you that have followed me for quite some time now, I think this is a good kind of get to know me, get to know how I think video. And of course, I put out questions to you guys before about me being on YouTube for 3.5 years and me being vegan. And a lot of you guys asked questions on, you know, like what started this all, how, why did you become vegan? And I'm still gonna be doing that video, but I thought that this was one that I wanted you guys to know, just so that you understand what I am as a creator. I think a lot of this experience has shaped this channel. I'm always hoping that experiences like this, when people say it out loud, will help other people who are either in that situation themselves or just things to look out for. And I think that the experience changed me in 2 ways, and they're not ways that you might necessarily think. First one was my mom passing away is the sole reason that I became vegan. I think I went vegan for very selfish reasons at first. I, at the time, had just started playing around with being a freelancer, and during that time, I didn't have a lot of jobs lining up. I was kind of writing on the side, and so I was able to visit my mom at the hospital every day. So she got sick, or she found out that she got sick sometime in October of 2015, and she passed away at the end of December of 2015. So it was one of those things where maybe this was lucky as well, but the cancer was really quick. But at the same time, I think it was always too quick for me. It was always one step ahead of me, and I didn't really know what to do. But it was during those 4 months I went to the hospital every day, and I was able to see what it looked like for someone to get sick really quickly. You know, so I didn't need to span 10 years. I was able to see it all, and what happens when you're, you know, fairly healthy to when you are not. And very selfishly, I think if I have any control over this, over my health, then anything to avoid having that happen, you know, whether it's 10% chance, 20% chance of not doing it to my family, of not doing it to myself, because I saw how horrible it was. And so health for me, especially in terms of eating well, I'm very sensitive to the subject, especially with people that are close to me. Like I don't like to force anybody that is not, you know, into it. That's you do you, right? But especially with family, sometimes like I find it really annoying that people say like, well, you know, you only live once, so you know you really have to enjoy yourself, and that is absolutely true. But I also think like some people, they're lucky enough to have never seen someone get sick before, and so you kind of forget that that death is not just one moment. Like it's not like boom, you've died, but those last years can be rough. You know, you're in your 20s now, mid-20s, mid-30s, you don't really have to watch out for what you eat or anything. You know, times are good right now, but essentially what you're doing is you're you know, you're setting yourself up for good times all around. And of course, we'll explore more of the vegan journey in a future video. And number two, how that whole experience changed me was how I looked at authority. Specifically, how I looked at authority that I thought was supposed to look out for you. They are supposed to protect you. They know more than you. You know, they are supposed to look out for your well-being. And honestly, heart of hearts, I think back about this all the time, every year, sometimes, you know, initially every day, that I really, 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 really didn't feel like those doctors had my mom's best interest in mind. And I will tell you, I'll tell you why. So part of dealing with an illness, whenever, if you guys ever have to, is like, you deal with the illness and everything that goes with that, but you also have to deal with doctors and the hospital as well. And if you were in a similar situation like my mom, she had to stay in the hospital for the past maybe like 2 months of her life. And you see people come and go throughout the hospital. You know, they get sick, they get better. But my mom pretty much stayed there, and she was the healthiest when she got in, and yeah, and it pretty much went down from there. Yeah, this part's a bit complicated. If we fast track it a little bit, my mom had a cancer of the unknown primary, CUP case, where the cancer developed. They found it in her liver first, but it wasn't liver cancer. And so when you have cancer, obviously there's a bunch of different types of cancers depending on, I guess, where it started or what kind of cells it affects. And they knew it was in the liver, but they were like, that's not liver cancer. And they were telling me, you know, in order to know what types of treatment for it, obviously you have to know where the cancer was coming from. And, you know, I was running around like a mad woman because I was like, I must find the cancer. I need to, everything, we need to start treatment. We need to do everything. And doctors had originally thought that it was pancreatic at first, but somehow they decided it was not. And eventually I was like, okay, well, the symptoms really point to cholangiocarcinoma, bile duct cancer, because I had found an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. I showed it to the doctors, and they were like, no, that's not what it is. And fast forward to, I'd say maybe 2 weeks before my mom passed, one of the kind of key doctors on our team that was supposed to be, you know, very good in, trial medication, trial treatments. He was like, yeah, like we do think it's bile duct cancer now. And I was like, why now? Like, why are you so sure now? Why weren't you sure, you know, like 2 months ago, 3 months ago? And he said this statement. He said, sometimes doctors don't like to admit to a disease that they do not know how to solve. You're like, what? You're like, expletive. Like, what do you mean? Right? And so I think about this statement very, very often. I think that doctors took advantage of my mom because they were, like maybe they were worried about money and having a patient transfer somewhere, but two, like I think that they were worried that their egos would get hurt, that they had something here that they didn't know how to solve. And what they could have done was told the family, you know? And if you tell the family that this is a very, very hard case to solve, that I don't really know how to solve it, then we make plans for something else, right? Like, we don't have to spend the last couple months in the hospital where she didn't really like hospitals, and now I don't like hospitals, which is really dumb because when you get sick, you go to the hospital. I acknowledge this, that my mom got a disease at a time when there was no cure for it. Things like bile duct cancer, things like pancreatic cancer. You know that we're at a time when once you get it, because it is a cancer that hides so well, once you start seeing symptoms, it's very difficult. And so, yeah, like I think my mom would have passed away anyways, whether it be 4 months, whether it be 6 months, whether it be maybe a year. But I think that she could have passed away with a lot more dignity than she did. I think that she could have spent a lot of more time at home. I think that she, could have went traveling a bit. I think we could have tied up loose ends a lot. And I think because the doctors were either too proud to admit it, or sometimes I even felt like they were uncomfortable talking about death with me and my family. Like it was very weird. They were like, oh, like, we're not gonna tell your mom this, but like we think that like this could be serious. And it was something weird where like it was like maybe everybody who was there was a doctor, and so they knew what was going on because it was this giant team. There was always like students around, and it was always very confusing, which I hated. There was like a lot of people that I didn't know that would always just come around and ask the same questions, and that's fine. But it was like either they thought that you knew, so they didn't tell you, only the thought is like my mom was healthy a month ago. So if I'm in the hospital now and you know that this is really serious, you need to sit down with someone and say, hey, like, I know this is a stark difference from a month ago when she was just running around and jumping around and all happy, but this is what's happening. And I know a couple of people in the medical field that are like, listen, like, maybe doctors are smart, they're very well educated, but they're not that good. They're not that good with people. Figures, right? Like a year later, after she passed away, I went to a very big hospital in Boston known for cancer. It's Dana-Farber. It's probably world famous as well. And I got my, it's genetic testing. I just wanted to make sure that everything was okay. I qualified for it so that I wouldn't have to pay, thousands and thousands of dollars. And I was able to ask the doctor, there was a couple of them, but I was able to ask the doctor that was looking through my charts, because I had to I sent them all of the paperwork from my mom's hospital to this hospital. And they're all in Boston. So, and I said, looking through those notes, would you have been able to tell what the cancer was? And he goes, I don't know exactly what you mean. He looks at me and he goes, I don't know exactly what you mean, but yes, we could have seen that it was gallbladder cancer early on. So, and so that was one of those things that really bothered me, because I think back to it all the time, and I think like the other hospital probably knew it early enough. Even if they couldn't pinpoint it exactly, I think that they knew that it was something that was very difficult to solve. And all they had to say was to say we're gonna try our best, but we're not sure that there is something that we can do right now. And to give me the option of saying, okay, to give us as a family the option of saying, okay, like, do we want this, do we not want this? But instead I was running around like a wild monkey, trying to, like read all the papers and like to find out, like what is this cancer and how can we fix this? And I always felt like I was one step behind. Like I always felt like it's like, oh, found it, and then to find out like, oh, like things have just gotten worse, and then now we have to find something else. And I was always, cancer was always here. I was always here. Yeah. I think it's always really good to keep your hopes up and to continue fighting and to be really strong and be there for your family. But I also think it's a responsibility for people who are in charge, who are not supposed to be taking advantage of you, to tell you really the truth, whether that is good news or that is bad news, so that you as a human being can make plans for yourself to leave properly. I'll tell you that when my mom passed away, everything was it was all over the place. We didn't have anything in plan. It was very bad. It was sad, but then it was also very bad because you had to deal with the logistics of everything else. So, okay. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my mom before we just head into the story, so that you guys will know, just in general, like stuff to look out for, things that you may be able to relate with. So my mom was born in 1960 in Hong Kong, and she was the second child, oldest daughter of 4 people. So she had an older brother and then 2 younger sisters. And for her to be the oldest female in a Chinese family meant that there was a lot of responsibility on her hands. She was the one that was responsible for taking care of the 2 younger siblings while my grandparents were at work and doing other things. And this is kind of like old tradition, but usually, when you pass down things, everything goes to the oldest son, and he's really able to do a lot of things that maybe a daughter can't do. And so my mom had to go to work very young. She left high school to work, and she was just super, super smart. Like, for someone that did not finish high school, I remember that my mom, throughout, like, even the first year or 2 of high school, she was the one to help me with math homework. She was brilliant at logic. She was so quick with numbers. She later worked her way up from a bank teller all the way up to manager. So I look back at that time today, and I look at the things that my mom was just so good at. And I think, no doubt, if she had been a daughter of today's society with the opportunities that it affords, like, no doubt she would have been like a computer programmer or something. She was sharp, just really, really quick with numbers. It's amazing. It's something that's like really just quite natural to her. She was amazing. And so, because she started working quite young, she was very street savvy. Not like in a bad way. She was just very savvy. She was very street smart. And so for her, that made her. She wasn't necessarily a tiger mom in that aspect, but she was stern. Like, she didn't always like to smile much until she got older later, and she changed and kind of Americanized. But she was a mom that I think could be somewhat intense. Like, she is 100% willing to jump in front of, like a running car for you. But in terms of, like, sometimes as a kid you need like emotional support. I think, my mom was quite tough in that aspect. She always wanted us to, do well in school and not get into trouble. And it was one of those things where my brother and I, we didn't really, like, we were actually pretty good kids looking back at it. It was one of those things where I wouldn't necessarily do something because, like, I already knew how my mom would react. Like, I already knew how disappointed she would be. Like, maybe she wouldn't yell at you, but maybe she'd be like really disappointed. although she'd yell at you as well. So early on in my YouTube days, when I had, I had like 80 people following me and nobody would talk to me, nobody would leave comments. My views were like 10 if I was lucky. She would be someone who, if she was at home after she'd come back from work, she would like put those videos on repeat. She would just watch all of them over and over. And it's weird because like usually like you put it on repeat, you might not watch it, but like my mom actually she watched the videos and then she would call me up afterwards and she'd be like, you're kind of like smiling a little bit too much. People aren't gonna take you seriously. Like your smile is too big. And so that was one of those things where I was like, okay. Yeah, she was one of those moms. And going back to the hospital, when she was still kind of well enough to speak, the nurses would be telling me like, oh yeah, like your mom told me to check out your YouTube channel. And that was back in 2015. 2015, nobody was watching me. Like my mom, even when she was sick, was telling nurses, hey, like you should go and check out my daughter's YouTube channel. So yeah, she was tough. She definitely probably wanted me to be a doctor instead. But when she knew that this was something that really interested me, I think she was secretly very supportive, as a mom is. Yeah, so just kind of running through her whole story so that some of you guys will know what to look out for is, so she was 55 when she passed, and I think a year before she had started to lose weight. I don't want to say like considerably, but I just always thought, okay, like she's getting older people don't eat as much, like menopause, like whatever, right? And I didn't look into it as I should have. And I think that that's like one of the things to kind of be aware of is when you are young, the relationship between you and your parents, they're different. Like they always look out for you, right? They're always like, are you eating correctly? Is everything okay? Like you should go to the hospital, you should go to whatever. And you kind of forget that as you get older, you need to be asking them the same questions. Like, are you feeling okay? Like, how are you doing? Are you going to all of your doctor's checkups? Because sometimes, like, when I found out, like, she wasn't always doing that. And that wasn't in particular the issue for this particular thing, but the year before she had started losing weight, I didn't really think much of it. I thought like, she like liked to diet as well, and she was a pretty clean eater actually. I mean, she wasn't vegan, but like she didn't have much fats in her diet, much sugar. She was a fairly clean eater. And it was actually like my brother who was telling me this afterwards. But yeah, like she had sort of like a year before she passed felt that she lost her appetite a lot, and wouldn't necessarily want to eat as much. And these are like really dumb things, like for a lot of illnesses they always say like, well like, if you're tired, if you lose your appetite, and it's just like sometimes stress causes that too, and it's really hard to see. But to know that while gaining weight is an issue, if you lose a lot of weight, if you suddenly find yourself not wanting to eat as much, that is also not good. That is not regular. And to go and catch this and to test this out too. Let's see, October she found out, but probably around September. September she was going to a wedding with my cousin and everything was fine, but sometime in September, she started having abdominal pain in the right side of her abdomen on the side. And when she had to go into the emergency room because it got to be uncomfortable. And the emergency room said, okay, well, this is probably just like a bacteria. I think they gave her antibiotics. and she went on that for 2 weeks, and nothing happened. It was still there. And so they made an appointment with the doctor, with the general practitioner. So my father worked in this hospital. He's not a doctor. My father worked in the hospital that my mom got treated at. And so he talked to a lot of the doctors. And one of the doctors, it could have been the general practitioner, told him, listen, if the antibiotics are not treating it, you need to take this pretty seriously, because I've seen these symptoms before, and you need to go and check it out immediately. And so initially, what they had thought and what that general practitioner had said to my dad was that they believed it to be pancreatic cancer. And if you ever look up pancreatic cancer, very famous people have passed away from it, you know that pancreatic and cancers of that area, typically by the time you find out, because it's such a well-hidden cancer, those organs are kind of behind other things, they don't have much of a symptom until they do. So by the time you start having symptoms like abdominal pain, it could be, jaundice, it could be a bunch of other things, but there are also a bunch of normal things. So sometimes you wouldn't know it either. Like if you're tired, if you're, like you have itchy skin sometimes those are really normal things. And so that's what's really scary about cancer and certain types of cancer. What they did was they took a biopsy first, and they had to go in and they took it out. They took x-rays, they did everything, and they found a lump in the liver. But when they did the biopsy, and they can test for this with different markers, there's different chemicals in the cell, they said this is not liver cancer. What ended up happening was they said, okay, well, we're going to go and do, an endoscopy maybe, and then a laparoscopy, I think is what it's called. And they would stick cameras down maybe like the top half of your abdomen and then the lower half of your abdomen, and they would try to take pictures, and they kind of did this process of elimination of like, okay, like we didn't find any cancer there, we didn't find any cancer there, which is really stupid if you think about it, because if you knew that it was a cancer that, a cancer's job is to spread really quickly. Like they're really smart cells, other than they kill their host. But all of these lab tests, going in, making the appointment, coming back with the results, all of them took like two or 3 weeks. Everything about this process is slow, short of the cancer. And so sometimes it's really maddening, because if you have a big suspicion that it is a cancer that's moving fast, like, guys, please, let's not waste that time. Like, that's so stupid. And so eventually, we knew that if you stayed at the hospital, that times could be quicker, because if you stayed at the hospital, you could have different surgeries and different x-rays overnight, instead of having it in the morning. And that means that you didn't need to necessarily compete with the other people for the times, so everything could be a lot quicker. And my mom had to think long and hard, because she did not like being in hospitals. But she thought, okay, that's going to be the more convenient thing. That's fine. And so she went into the hospital. This was still a CUP case at the moment. It was cancer of the unknown primary. And I remember that cancer because the mayor of Boston at that time had it and passed away at that hospital. It was very confusing. Like in the morning, they would come with like charts, and they would tell you like, okay, like this is what's happening in your body, this is what's happening here, and then every morning they would come back and like kind of check on you, but kind of not. Things got progressively worse very, very quickly, and within, I think, a week, my mom was too weak to get up and walk around. when you can't get up and walk around, right? Your body becomes very funny. It needs to stand up. Like, for example, to go to the bathroom, different processes. Like, you need to be able to walk around. If you can't walk around, things kind of start deteriorating. And she started getting more and more pains. And keeping in mind, like, doctors were still like, oh, we're still trying to find out kind of like what it is. And maybe they weren't. I think like behind the scenes, they knew what was going on. They just didn't tell me. Because they knew, because eventually, with what that doctor said. So it got worse and worse. She was on pain medications a lot because her pain would be a lot, and they had her on morphine first. But then eventually, and I guess like this was the one that kind of also upset me, was they started putting her on fentanyl. And fentanyl, even before she entered the hospital, they gave her a patch because they're like, oh yeah, you just stick it on like a sticker. And my mom was freaked out by fentanyl because she was like, oh my gosh, like that night when I slept, I couldn't feel my legs. It was so powerful. And that was like at a time when people were just starting to hear about fentanyl, but like we didn't know that it was as strong as it was today, as crazy as it was. And I know that for a cancer patient's place, that in particular, that situation is one of the probably like the only times that it's good to recommend such a strong pain reliever. But what it essentially did to my mom was not only was she lying on the bed because she was too weak, she couldn't keep down food anymore. And that happened fairly quickly because of abdominal pains. And she wasn't a particularly big woman either. She was 5'2", 5'3", and so they would try to like get her on fentanyl because they were like, oh yeah, like like when you leave the hospital, it'll be a lot more convenient. And the thing is, like every time that they put her on it, she wouldn't be able to feel her legs. She wouldn't be able to feel anything. And so here's this patient that's like on the bed and she's already freaked out about what's happening. And then like people are like, yeah, like fentanyl. So yeah, she didn't feel anything, and it made her even like more weirded out, when you lose connection with your body. And yeah, so anyways, what ended up happening was like they x-rayed her and she had these little bumps throughout her abdominal area. And what is it, ascites? I can't remember the exact words now, but when they had said, okay, like it's spread all over, I just like freaked out. And what happened throughout the hospital stay was that these bumps would get bigger and they pushed in on the small intestine. So whenever she ate, the food couldn't go down and it would make her throw up. And I think while she was in the hospital, like she went through the first 20 days on just an IV. Like she didn't keep down anything. Like hospital meals, like you would think for cancer patients that they would make something tailored to like whatever you have. And I remember some of these people coming up to me and they're like, well, we can't do anything. Even like a team that's specifically for nutrition, they're like, well, we can't do anything because she can't keep food down. And I was just like, what is your job again? Like, you're in a cancer hospital, you idiots. So she couldn't keep her food down. She was weak. And they wouldn't give her intravenous nutrients because they were worried about infection. And this is kind of another thing, is different states have different laws on treatment. And it was done for a good purpose because sometimes states have stronger laws because they're worried that doctors will just prescribe you things for money. And in Massachusetts, we are particularly conservative about giving people medication if it will hurt them. Potentially, we are also precautious, even if it might help them. So Massachusetts is not a state that, what I mean is Massachusetts is not a state that takes gambles on treatment as much as, I'm gonna go up on a leap and say, as like MD Anderson in like Texas or something, because that's something that a passing doctor, you know, they do their rotations, was saying to me, was that some states are, you know, they're riskier with treatment, and that's really up to your family, really. I think sometimes with a risky cancer, such as cholangiocarcinoma, such as, you know, pancreatic cancer, where it's going to be possibly a losing battle, I think then you think about it. You think like, okay, like, do I just want to go home? Do I want to, you know, spend the rest of my days with my family? Or, you know, do I want to risk it? And a risk is a risk, because, you know, sometimes you get better, but many times you don't. And to keep that in mind as well. But certain states are more conservative than others. Certain states will not give you certain treatments because they're worried that you might get sick from this, or more sick, or maybe you'll die, and then, you know, there's lawsuits and whatnot. And I would like to think that the decisions given to my mom were all very altruistic like that they were worried about hurting her. But part of me also, like, part of me also thinks that, you know, like they didn't really feed her for a good month, and that's because they were worried that she would get sick. And it's valid, but like sometimes, like, I look at the other motivations that I have heard them say, and I can kind of look back on, and I think, I think sometimes you have to really do your research. If you're lucky enough and you can pack your bags for a little bit and give it your all, you might want to go to some other states that are willing to give treatment that some other states are not. Or not, right? So, and there's nothing wrong with not. Like, there's nothing wrong with being like, okay, like, it's not, like, we're programmed so much to be like, okay, like, it's cancer, like, we have to, like, fight it to the end. And, like, sometimes it's like, it's okay if you just think like, this is the right step for me, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna hang out with my family. It's, you know, that's like, that's okay too. Like, you don't have to be programmed to be like, yeah, I'll fight until whatever. So when something as important as a place like a hospital is understaffed, you start seeing the other staff not being able to perform as well. We definitely had some nurses that I felt like were questionable. Not always because they were tired, but I think it was questionable. There were times when my mom had to sit in a bedpan, and like 10 minutes later, a nurse would come and she would just be like, oh my gosh, like, it would be so uncomfortable for her to like just like lie there. And she was, it was such a loss of dignity for her to be in a hospital, to not be able to control her bodily functions, to not be able to move, to need help with everything, to need help dressing, to need help showering, to need help going to the bathroom. Those are the loss of dignities that I don't think people talk about enough when they say like, oh, well, you know, it's, you know, you got one life to live, and it's all, you know, just, yeah. Those last days in particular were really hard. I was really tired. Every day I got more tired, and by the end, I almost felt like like I couldn't deal with it anymore, surely because of just being tired, being overwhelmed, being like fearful every day. That is like a different type of stress. And to remember that if any of you guys are going through it, you know, take a break sometimes. Like, don't feel guilty. Like, you don't have to go to the hospital every day. It is more important that you stay strong and that you stay well, so that you can continue being a cheerleader and to cheer whoever is sick up, because they're really going to need that. And to not, you don't need to put that burden on yourself, because it, you know, you want to be in it, and you want to be in it for the long run if you need to be. So yeah, that's kind of my view on, I guess, authority. It's not all the time, but I always like to see if there is other motive to things. I always like to make sure that people are genuine, and that, I think, that carries through, hopefully, in the types of content that you see and the recipes that I do and the types of content that I choose to make. Is like, I always want to be questioning things. I don't really like to just take things as it is, because that was really like younger me that was too afraid to question things. I was too afraid because I thought, ooh, here is an authority figure, they know more than me, and it's important to trust your doctors too, but I also think it's important to take a step back and to not only analyze the situation, but to know from somebody else's experience and from somebody else's perspective that, like, yeah, sometimes other things come at play that affect the information that somebody tells you. Yeah. So yeah, I will probably see you guys again this Sunday with a lovely recipe, and I hope to be doing that, the vegan journey and the YouTube journey video for you guys soon, and to answer all of your questions. So yeah, so I will be seeing you guys again soon, next time. Bye.